Who needs an estate plan? The question for today, if we're going to talk about estate planning for everyone, when you think about estate, what are some of the things that come to mind? Words like, I have a vast amount of money. Families with huge estates, sprawling gardens, and even beautiful pools to lay by. But the reality is, we all have an estate. Everything that we own is essentially our estate. And no matter the size of it, one thing is in common, you can't take it with you, right? It is everything you own, but you can't take it with you once you're gone. And so then what do you do with it? Well, I wanted to share with you a story from my life. And by the way, I'm Joe Dewey. I am one of the wealth partners with Prairie View Wealth Partners, and we are an office of the Thriving Advisor Network. I'm also the speaker for our office. And I've been in the financial services industry for 15 years, but more recently have focused most of my activity on helping Christian families with financial planning and estate planning, as well as college planning. Today, we're going to focus in on that estate planning piece because, again, everything that you have is part of your estate. And so I learned how to plan for an estate using a really good role model. That role model is my mother, Eunice Dewey. And the way it worked in our family, Mom decided that when she was about 90 years old, that she was going to sell what remained of their farm. There was about 30 acres in the house that she lived in. So we started making those steps towards finalizing her estate. And so she sold that, she moved in with my sister. And then we got together as a family, all the siblings and my mom, and we went through everything. We decided to sort who would like to have what in the way of mementos and keepsakes. And so we sorted all of that out, and everything that was left was things that the various, the mom's beneficiaries didn't want to have, or heirs, siblings. And so then we brought in an estate sale company. They picked everything else up, and that was part of her estate. And so she wanted to have everything in order. In fact, she knew the hymns that she wanted played at her funeral. She knew the type of coffee hour she wanted following the funeral, and then the meal that we would have after the interment when we went to the cemetery where she was buried next to her husband, my father. And she had all of those details planned in advance so that she didn't have to burden her children, us siblings. And that, to me, is a simple estate. She didn't have a lot of money, and yet it was a way to plan for what would happen with her estate. So today we're going to cover a number of topics. We're going to take a dive into assets, what make up the assets that are part of a financial or an estate plan. We're going to take a look at beneficiaries and who should be your beneficiaries and how do you set those up. We're going to talk about wills, trusts, and other financial planning tools, and then kind of your choices when it comes to your final choices that you would have, and then a couple of resources that can help you in your process. I'm going to have 2 free resources that we'll talk about at the end that will give you some tools to help you through this process, whether you've already established your estate plan or whether you haven't even started on it yet. These tools will help you along the way. So first, let's take a look at assets. Now, let's think about 1960. We've got a family with 2 kids. Might look like something like the Leave It to Beaver family, right? And at this point, the two children loved their parents. The father was a school administrator, and the mother worked in a local shop. And one year, the father had to travel to the East Coast for a conference, for an educational conference for the school. And when he came back, he brought this souvenir. It was a purple pig. And it was, ceramic purple pig. And it was cute. And so his name was Bob, hers was Betty Lou. And Betty Lou put that purple pig on the mantle. And then fast forward, this beautiful young family, now in 75, they've started to mature. At that point, Bob had passed on. Betty Lou, or as the grandkids called her, Lulu, would host Sunday dinners. Now that's at noon for people like me that grew up on a farm, and some folks, the dinner's at night. But they would gather together, and one of the kind of running joke, so to speak, was of the two children, who was going to get the purple pig. And it was a fun way, but at that point, they really didn't know how they would handle some of those things. So fast forward to 2015, and now Lulu is kind of the matriarch of the family. The grandkids are growing up. And one of the grandchildren actually went on eBay and found an identical purple pig and gave that to Lulu as a Christmas present. So now there were two identical purple pigs, both up on the mantle, and they would, nobody knew which one was which. And you know, when she actually passed away, then guess what? Both kids got their own purple pig. A way that they could be able to share in those wonderful family memories that they had. And so I would encourage you to take a moment and jot down 5 assets that are really important to you. They don't necessarily have to be monetary assets. These are things that you own that are very important to you. They could be more of a family legacy, any sort of things that just jot down the 5 most important of these assets. One of mine is a picture of my dad showing the Grand Champion Steer at the 1945 International Livestock Show. That one of the biggest shows ever held. The steer was named Tomahawk, and that steer sold for a world record-setting price of $10 a pound. It doubled the former world record. And I have that picture, and I have a copy of a front page article from the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, a picture of Dad and that steer Tomahawk. To me, that's a priceless asset, and something that I want my kids to be able to share. So if you've had an opportunity to jot down those 5 assets. Now, in 2015, when Lulu passed and they got the 2 pigs, it was a fairly easy way to split up the estate. Fast forward a year to 2016. Anybody remember one of the things that happened in 2016? Well, Prince died suddenly, the entertainer, the singer. And I read an article in USA Today recently that said, to this day, that estate has still not been settled. They don't even know how much it's worth. It's worth many millions of dollars, and he had 5 siblings, but left no will. And so now lawyers spending money trying to sort out who's going to get what, because there wasn't an estate plan in place. There wasn't planning ahead of time. So one of the key things to think about are, who do you want your things to go to? So think of this newlywed couple. So they've just come together and they just got back from their honeymoon. And do you think the first thing on their mind is, oh, I need to update my beneficiaries on my 401k at work? Probably not. And yet, think about the importance of taking a few moments, logging in and updating the beneficiary on their 401k account from maybe a parent or a sibling to their new partner. Because if something happens, you want to be sure that it follows your wishes. Now, some assets will pass just based on what's called a transfer on death. And they'll simply pass by naming the individual that it would pass to. And there are typically 2 types of transfer on death accounts. Investment accounts, which can be retirement accounts, there can be bank accounts, life insurance, other retirement accounts. These things you can actually name a beneficiary or a transfer on death so that it becomes that person's property as soon as you pass. And typically then that doesn't even have to go through the will or even probate if a beneficiary is named. So you want to review those beneficiaries periodically. It's important to make sure that, and well, let's say the same couple, find out they're expecting. Well, now a whole new set of things come into play. Who's going to get what if one or both of them pass, maybe with a new baby? Well, one of the considerations could be who's going to take care of that baby, right? And so they need to spend some time and think about, have a conversation about who would be able to care for our child if something happened to both of us? And who should manage our estate, take care of all of the final things if something happens? It's important to have those ideas, those thoughts in advance, so you know how things will be taken care of. And then just a quick survey. Have you told your beneficiaries they are named on any of your assets? You'll just jot that into the chat box, but yes or no or some. Have you had that conversation? Do they know that they've been named as a beneficiary on your accounts? I'll give you an example. In my family, my in-laws, my wife's parents, we decided to have a family meeting. I like to call them a family checkup. And since we're spread kind of all over the country, we did it via Zoom. That, of course, became more popular over the last 2 years to host Zoom meetings. And we gathered the whole family. They went through all of their kind of final wishes. I'm their financial planner, so I also went through the assets that they have and how those beneficiaries are set. And they determined during that conversation that Paul, my father-in-law, would like to actually change some of the beneficiaries that he had originally established. Again, important to check in on these things from time to time. And so we're able to update those. And this family check-in meeting was a great opportunity so that everybody knew, what do my parents want and how are we going to handle things? When an asset passes, it's called a transfer. And there's a couple of types of transfers. There's lifetime transfer. That's things that are transferred while you're alive. Maybe you are aging and you want to transfer your home to your trust or to a child. Well, you can do that, and that's during your lifetime. And then there's the testamentary transfers, and that's after you pass. And when a transfer occurs, there's a possibility that there also may be tax consequences. So this is a good place to work with your tax professional, your attorney, but especially your financial planner. At our office, when we work with families under estate planning, we look at those potential tax consequences. As an example, because of the Secure Act, children can inherit IRAs, but it used to be they would be able to withdraw the money over their lifetime, spreading out any tax consequences, because withdrawals from an IRA, of course, are taxable. That's a tax deferred kind of an account. The Secure Act came along 2 years ago, and now they've changed it so that the beneficiary of an IRA must withdraw all of the money within 10 years without a penalty. And so that if there's, say, $100,000 and they took out a tenth of it each year for 10 years, that's another $10,000 of taxable income that child would have. And that's a tax consequence. There are other types of accounts and assets that might have some type of tax consequences or maybe some benefits if there's still the ability to step up basis, it's called, if they transfer stocks, for example, and they've gone up in value, that it can change to the current value so the beneficiary doesn't have to pay additional capital gains taxes. All of those things are important in these transfers, whether they're during your life or upon death. So it's really important to know, are your beneficiaries up to date? So check all the accounts that have beneficiaries because things can change, things can, life things happen. With your children, if you want the assets to pass, let's say you have more than one child, and you want it to stay in that generation. I'll use an example of a person that has 3 children. They all have children, so there's grandkids. Now, if the beneficiary is just the name of the 3 children, and one of them passes before you do, then instead of it being split up into thirds, it would now get split in half to the 2 living beneficiaries. But the grandkids may or may not get anything because they didn't have the words John Doe per stirpes. It looks like stripes spelled wrong, but those 2 words keep the money in the generational lines. So that same example, the 3 kids and the grandkids, one of them predeceases you. Instead of going 50-50, you'll still say a third, and the third, but that third would go to the grandkids. So it's important, if that's your wishes, to be sure those two little words are on there to protect your children and your grandchildren. And this is a good conversation to have. Again, we're going to talk about that throughout this, but the importance of having these conversations. And they don't necessarily need to be a big family meeting like we did on Zoom. These can be little individual conversations along the way. Let's say you know that, as far as transfers, maybe a physical asset, your son particularly likes your dining table set. Well, you can have that conversation in advance and say, you know what, when I pass, I want you to have that dining table, and maybe jot it down so that people know. But have those conversations along the way. Then another important part is who's going to manage my assets if I can't, if I get to a point where I'm unable to. Well, we're going to talk about some tools here. We're going to talk about wills, trusts, and other tools that are available to you within your estate. And we want to be sure that you understand some of the differences. So the first tool we'll talk about is a will. Now, a will, according to the definition in the dictionary, a will is a legal declaration of a person's wishes regarding the disposal of his or her property or estate after death. In other words, you're going to name who's going to take care of your stuff when you're gone. Now, you can name one or more people to manage your estate. If it's within your will, they become the executor of the will. And then you can detail the distribution of your property at death. Now, the one thing it doesn't do is protect you from, protect your heirs from having to deal with probate court. The probate court, for all of those assets that don't have beneficiaries, would still be the one who would make final decisions over making sure that the will is implemented properly. So, important question, do you have a will? If you don't, I suggest either going online and doing a basic one, getting with a financial planner like ourselves to put together a will, or an estate attorney. But it's important to have your wishes laid out in advance. So another question to think about is, do you have minor children or dependents? You're going to want to determine who's going to be responsible for taking care of them if you're gone. And so this is an important place to include that in your will of who's going to be the guardians of any minor dependents, minor children or dependents. And again, this is another good place for that conversation, especially around who would be the guardian. It's pretty important that the people know that you are wishing that they would take care of your children if they're gone, that they know that in advance. And that can be any number of people, right? It could be a sibling that lives nearby. Maybe it's your college roommate that's your best friend, and you have kids the same age. Now, they may not even live in the same state, but you might choose to have them be the guardians, or maybe it's a cousin or a friend that has more similar values to you than other people. Regardless of who it is, determine who it is and then have that conversation. Now, what is probate? Well, that's the legal process that takes place after someone dies. I mentioned that earlier as it regards to a will. A will helps simplify the probate process if they do have to go through it, as long as it's not a small estate handled with a small estate affidavit or whatever. But a will helps simplify that process, but it doesn't prevent some assets from going through probate, especially those assets that don't have a beneficiary. If you have a life insurance policy, you've named the beneficiaries, you submit the claim, the life insurance company pays out the benefit. If you have a beneficiary on your bank account, then it transfers on death to that person. But all those assets that don't have beneficiaries, you may be able to direct where those would go in your will. And that's going to make the probate process much quicker and easier, because it can be a pretty cumbersome process in some cases. Going back to the example of my mom and my family, she had everything laid out very clear. We already had divided up the things that we wanted. And really, it was just disposing of any assets and splitting up her financial estate. And that was very simple, and yet it still took a few months to get all of that finalized. Now, it was no big deal. We didn't have dire need for the money or anything, but there are some cases where that can be a challenge. And Of course, your estate's probably not like Prince's, and it's still going on for 5 years, but it's certainly that will can simplify that process. Now, the second tool is a living trust. And this is a special kind of estate planning tool that the trust can actually, it's an entity that can own your assets while you're alive. But it also then tells your trustee, the person that you name that's going to implement your wishes, it tells them how to distribute them after you die. So it's a living trust, a revocable living trust that you are a trustee of while you're alive. Maybe if it's you and a spouse, your spouse is the trustee and after you're gone, and then after they're gone, you name the subsequent trustee. Now, a trustee doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. Oftentimes it is, it might be a child, but it also could be a very close friend, somebody that knows you very well, that you trust to carry out your wishes that are implemented or laid out in your will and trust. It could be a trustee named from a trust company, somebody that is a professional that handles trust, and all they do is follow the steps within that trust and who things are going to be distributed to. So do you have a trust? It's not required, but it is a great option for your estate planning, where you can have control over your assets. The trust can own your assets while you're alive, like your house and your retirement accounts and so forth. And then again, that trustee will then distribute that after you're gone. But everything's in place, and a key difference versus just having a will is this does not go through probate. The trustee already has the power to distribute everything and finalize the estate based on that document or that trust document that is signed. So there's some useful situations. Of course, just if you have a special needs child, then make sure that that child is cared for and that there's money set aside to do that. And who's going to take care of that child? What happens if you can't handle your financial affairs? And also, what about your medical decisions? If you are having a health situation you can't decide for yourself, well, then you want to decide in advance who's going to be the one that handles that for you. And then advanced decisions in case of, say, a blended family, for example. You might want to be sure that a stepchild is not left out of being a recipient of some of the things of the estate that you'd like to leave with them. So a lot of different situations. These are just some useful ones. So I'll give you an example. So I worked with this couple, Bob and Mary. They're actual clients, so I changed their names, but they're clients of ours in our office. And we actually put together the whole package for them, the living trust, the will. Then we also did these advanced directives. And but one of the things that they wanted to do is they had 3 children. They have 3 children, and they want the 3 children to receive 1/3 of their estate apiece. But there are 2 things that they wanted to be sure were done. One is they also wanted to give a special $10,000 gift to their local church in Mokina, Illinois, south of Chicago. And they wanted to be sure that that gift was a part of it. And then they wanted their children to receive 1/3 of each. But those children were minor at this point when they put together the will and the trust. And they didn't want them to get it all in one lump sum. And so they set it up so that it spread out with 3 different distributions from the trust to the children. So the trust settles up all the assets. They have that amount of money that's going to be available. They send the $10,000 to the charity, in this case, a church. And then at 22, or upon completion of 4 years of college, or a bachelor degree, then they would get the first 1/3 of their money. And then at 25, they would get a second 1/3. And then at 30, get the final payout. You see, they wanted to spread it out, not to make decisions for their children, but they didn't want them at 18 suddenly coming into all this money and not really knowing how to handle it, having not had life experience and learn about those life choices. So that's just an example that Bob and Mary did, where we put together the trust, the will, and all the documents that they needed. That was this example. I was supposed to change this slide. But the living trust also can include, or as part of that whole package should include, what's called a durable power of attorney. And that's for the financial affairs. And I use an example of another family that we did this estate plan for, and that was Ted and Margaret. And Ted and Margaret had older children. They had 2 children, one of which was actually in the banking industry, so some financial experience. So they decided they wanted that child to be their power of attorney for their financial affairs. If it got to the point where they couldn't make financial decisions, then they wanted their son to operate under this power of attorney so they can make the decisions for them. And then what about if they need healthcare decisions? So I also did an advanced healthcare directive. Sometimes it's called a living will. And within that, they decided that the power of attorney for healthcare was going to be their daughter, who was actually in the health industry. She works for a hospital. And so it's just a little more, now, it doesn't have to be this way. I just use that as a real example of the 2 different people being chosen for the powers of attorney, but the importance of having those 2 documents. The durable power of attorney for the financial affairs, in case you can't make a decision, to make sure that bills are paid, to make sure that your estate is being handled properly while you're living, maybe to pay the property taxes, to pay any utilities and any bills, to make sure that that is all done. I have another client that the aunt in this case is now in a nursing home or a care facility and really unable to make her financial decisions. Didn't have any children. She's a pastor, but her niece is has the power of attorney for her financial affairs. And we're able to consolidate her assets into one place so that now the power of attorney, the niece, can actually manage everything for her aunt very carefully. Another example with the living will, again, the most recent estate plan that we worked with, they decided that they wanted to be sure and have everything decided in advance, whether they were to be kept on a respirator, whether they continue to receive nutrition even after it's too late. What about the disposition of the body after they're gone? Do they want to be buried? Do they want to be cremated? Do they want to donate organs or not? All of those decisions we make through that process. And again, this is another opportunity to have some of those conversations, to sit down with those people that are going to be the power of attorney and say, guess what? Would you please be the person that makes those decisions if I can't? You notice that string, that theme going throughout this, of having a conversation. I'm thinking of renaming the title of this workshop to estate planning, have a conversation, because it's that important. But then what about end of life choices? Have you thought about what you'd like to have happen after you die? Now, some of that is done in that process we were just talking about when setting up the advanced directives, the healthcare power of attorney and a living will. But also think about, like I talked about my mom, that she had pretty much everything planned out of what she wanted at the funeral and the meal afterwards and all of those things. Have you considered whether you want burial plots or someplace to store ashes if you're cremated? Do you have enough life insurance to cover your final expenses, or maybe to share additional assets that are tax-free with your beneficiaries, your heirs? Have you thought about how you want, like I said, your funeral and final arrangements to be done? Maybe even having some of those paid in advance or money set aside in your trust to be able to take care of those. All of those things are important to consider when we're looking at end of life choices. And like I said, we did that with my mom, and it made a very easy time for our family to celebrate her life, to grieve, but not have to worry about all the little details of, oh, mom didn't tell us what she wanted to hear at the funeral, or we don't know whether she wanted to donate her organs or not. We didn't know any of those things if you don't have that conversation. Again, estate planning, it's a conversation. So today is a day to make some of those decisions. It's time to think about all of those end of life choices, to think about the conversations you need to have about whether you're going to have a trust, whether you're going to have a will, and to make sure that your wishes are known to those that you love and that you care for, and that are probably going to be the beneficiaries of your estate. So I mentioned as we conclude that there were going to be a couple of resources. The first resource is actually, it's a PDF document that I will be glad to email to you if you send your, and I'll show you my contact information shortly before we're done, where you can send me an email to request this Introduction to Estate Planning, a document to help you through this process and with things to think through of what you could need as sort of as a reminder of what we talked about today in this estate planning process. So that's resource number one, this document, Introduction to Estate Planning. Actually, the last time I did this workshop, I also sent a secondary one with it that's related more to the living trust, just some additional information. So that's resource number one. Resource number two is what I call a customized strategy session. This is a 30 to 45-minute session. It's complimentary in your first visit, but I want you to know what we would cover. First, we would look at your overall financial picture. Are you on track to meet your financial goals? But then we would review any current estate plan that you have. You might have everything in place, that's great. We would just offer the opportunity to review it and make sure that what you have are all the documents that you would need and the strategies in place that you want to implement. We'll also give you some strategies that might strengthen your financial future, what your financial picture could look like by implementing one or two strategies. Maybe it's a tax strategy, like we talked about the impact of what can happen with an inherited IRA versus a Roth IRA or life insurance. As a result of this meeting, then that's what the meeting would include. So this isn't the sales pitch. This is an opportunity just to really have a customized session to review your situation and your estate. If there's anything you'd like to implement, well, in that meeting, at the end of that, we would talk about what that looks like. Some people like to engage us for financial planning, to actually put together an estate plan with those documents, which we can do very affordable. But again, we're not here to talk about those today. But if you have those questions, let me know and we can talk about that. So really, there's three choices. And I think of it kind of like as a stoplight. The green, yes, I'd like to schedule my customized strategy session right away. Later, I'd like to schedule my session, maybe in a couple of weeks. It's just today's not the right time. Or no, I don't need a strategy session at the time. That's fine. None of these things are required. I just want you to know that this is one of the resources that's available to you by attending this webinar, this workshop. And it's just important to know that we are financial advisors. We don't offer tax advice. We're not attorneys, but we are affiliated with the Thriving Advisor Network. And we are, again, financial professionals, not legal or accounting. And here's how you would contact us. So let's say you want one or two of those resources. You could give us a call. It's 708-326-4750. My personal email address is JDUEA, Joe Dewey, JDUEA at PV-WP.com. That's short for Prairie View Wealth Partners. And we found that people didn't like having to type out Prairie View Wealth Partners. So we shortened it to pv-wp.com, or our website. You can even locate us through that at pv-wp.com. So that's the ways that you would contact us. And again, send me an email or call us if you would like one of those free resources. We will get that out to you right away, or we'll be able to schedule a time for that customized strategy session if that's something that you'd like to take advantage of. Again, these resources are just as a benefit as a result of attending this time. I'd like to thank you for your time today. And I want to leave you with one thing to remember, that no matter what is in your estate, we can't take it with us, right? Somebody's going to have to deal with it. So take the time to make plans and share them with the people you love. Goodbye.